Welcome to the Huggadrum podcast, a life with drums and drumming. I am your host, Angus McCurrach, and you're very welcome. And now, let the drumming begin. Yes, it's the Huggadrum podcast, your rhythmic respite from reality. Fun with drums, including
Drumming joke of the week.
The anagram, drumagram.
and drums for life, well-being and drumming.
And now, here is your host from the Shedio. It's himself.
Yes, it's myself, and welcome to the fifth episode of the Huggadrum Hugcast, and you're all very welcome. If you've not listened to this before, you are in for a treat as always. This week we've got a story of the drumming moth. Yes, the drumming moth. And what else have we got? Oh yes, we've got a wee bit of a rant. Not a big rant, a rantette. A rantette, a mini rant, a petite rant, as they probably don't say in France. All about the quirkiness of words. The quirkiness of words. So we're going to get that going very shortly. But first of all, we are now heading in the UK into Mental Health Week. And one of the things that we are very keen on at Huggadrum is supporting people with mental health. And facilitated drum circles have got loads going for them in terms of helping people with their daily mental health. Helps to reduce stress, helps to boost their immune systems. And if you don't believe that, have a look at episode 4. We talk a bit more about it there. So Mental Health Week is coming up. In Scotland, 1 in 4 people have issues with their mental health during their lifetime. So it's not something that happens to very few people. It affects us all in one way or another. And I wanted to talk briefly about something, because it's Mental Health Week, about the benefits of drumming, and also look at a bit of a serious question. So what are the benefits of drumming? Well, the great thing is there's no pressure. At a drum circle, you're not required to learn anything. You're not required to perform. The aim of a drum circle is to join in with a group of people who are all just having fun. And you learn about listening to each other. You learn about watching each other. You find that other people are listening to you. You can express yourself. If you've had a bad day, have a bang on the drum. That's the great thing about drums. They're designed to be hit appropriately. You know, don't use a hammer or a screwdriver or whatever on a drum. If drums are designed to be used with your hands, use your hands. If they're designed to be used with a stick, use sticks. That might seem obvious, but the number of times. Anyway, they're good for helping you deal with stress. They're good for helping you socialise with other people, maybe without some of the usual uncomfortableness about not knowing what to say, feeling that you're not really part of the group. You very quickly will become part of a very new and special group when you're attending a drum circle. And in this part of the world, it looks like that we're going to be able to start offering our facilitated drum circles again within the next month or so. So keep an eye open on the huggadrum.com website for more information, or send us an email to hugcast@huggadrum.com. Now, are you feeling suicidal? Well, that's a question that even professionals in the mental health field find it difficult to ask sometimes. But what we do know is that many people who have felt suicidal always say that they wished somebody had asked at the time. All it takes is just to say, "Are you feeling suicidal?" Now, I'm not suggesting you go around saying that to everyone, but check out your friends, check out your family, check out your work colleagues. If they're not their usual self, maybe a bit quieter than normal, sometimes they can be a bit angrier than normal, more stressed out, have that chat with them. But listen to what they have to say. That can sometimes do wonders. Just listening. And have someone listening to you can make all the difference. But if you do have concerns, this goes one or two ways. Firstly, you ask someone whether they're feeling suicidal, and they might be outraged, they might be offended, they might laugh it off. In which case, you could probably move on. But the other way it could go is someone might say, "Yes, and I'm glad you've asked me." Now, the fear is that many people don't really know how to deal with that response. How do you then talk to someone who's just told you that they're feeling suicidal? Again, make sure they're safe, listen, get them the help that they need. You are not expected to deal with this person's mental health issues. There are professionals out there. There are counsellors. There are mental health nurses. There are psychiatric departments. There are helplines. Then in the UK there's the Samaritans breathing space in Scotland. So there are places that you can suggest that people get in touch with if they are being honest about how they are feeling with you. So during Mental Health Week, let's celebrate that we're all able to get outside into the sunlight again, and we're beginning nearly to get back to being able to participate in lots of activities that are fantastic for mental health. All of that is really optimistic. But during this week, just remember that some people might not be at that stage yet, or maybe feeling that, things have all been a bit too much, or have really just been isolated. Don't be afraid of asking someone, "Are you feeling suicidal?" So, but as I say, we've got a fantastic show for you, and we're going to kick things off with the petite rant, or the wee rant, the wee drummer's rant this week, and we're going to be talking about quirky language. I like the quirky things that people say sometimes. Things that kind of have their own meaning and sense, but when you analyse what someone has actually said to you, it really doesn't make much sense. Or it means something literally different to its common or inherent meaning. An obvious example would be the double negatives that we're all familiar with. Up in this part of Scotland, somebody might say to you, "I'm nae doing Nathan," which roughly translates as, not roughly, does translate as, "I'm not doing nothing." Now, the meaning of that is, I'm not doing anything, or I'm not going to do anything. But I'm not doing nothing has that double negative element to it. Because if I'm not doing nothing, then logically I'm doing something. But I'm not wanting to say I'm doing something. You know what I mean. Anyway, that opens the door to this thought about quirky language. It's an appetizer. It's a wee starter before we go into the main menu. A cocktail stick with a wee bit of cheese and pineapple, just to whet your appetite. Because what made me think about this today was I remembered something that a friend of mine said to me years ago, and I think we'd been listening to a song either on the radio or on a cassette tape. Cassette tapes. Remember those? Anyway, we'd been listening to a song and he said to me, "Have you listened to that since the last time you heard it?" Now, I knew what he meant. I think what he meant was, have you listened to that recently? But what he said was, have you listened to that since the last time you heard it? Now, obviously, whenever I had last listened to it would have been the last time I also heard it. Equally, the last time I heard it would have been the last time I listened to it. So there was an inbuilt illogicality about what he was asking me. And what I found fascinating was I knew what he meant. Have you listened to that since the last time you heard it? Have you seen that since the last time you looked at it? Similar idea. But somehow I knew what he meant. So that's the sort of quirky bit I like about language. And another thing. Oh yes. This involves my lovely wife. My lovely wife always tells me that yes, she does snore, but when she snores, she always wakes herself up. How do you know that you always wake yourself up with your snoring, when your only experience of snoring is when you wake yourself up? She has no way of telling whether there's other episodes of her sleep pattern when she is snoring and doesn't wake herself up. And I am here today as a witness to the fact that she often snores and does not wake herself up. But again, there's that logic. There's something just missing about what's happening there. So I like this quirky idea that sometimes we have ideas within our language that have that quirkiness about them. They have an inbuilt illogical facet to them that means that actually it doesn't make much sense, but it's also imbibed with some kind of meaning that we all understand. But another one, now this is one that I like. Now this was first drawn to my attention by a Scottish comedian called Fred Macaulay. Fred opined one day, probably on the radio, that the question that you get asked, so imagine the scene, picture the scene. You've arrived at the airport, and I know for most of us at the moment that means picturing the scene and not actually being able to do it, but just imagine you're arriving at the airport, you've got your suitcases, you've got your passport and your ticket, you're waiting in the queue, and patiently the queue winds itself round and you get to the front. And the man or the woman takes your passport and ticket, has a look at it and says, "Could someone have interfered with your luggage without you knowing it?" Well, when you think about it, the obvious answer to that is yes. Because lots of things can happen without your knowledge. Could someone have run up to your house at 2 o'clock in the morning, stood in front of the doorbell, thought about ringing it just to wake you up and annoy you, but then changed their mind and ran away again, all without you knowing it? Well, yes. It's unlikely, but it's possible. Could people from another planet have beamed down to my back garden in the middle of the night, had a conversation telepathically with my cat, and then suddenly disappeared again, all without me knowing it? Well, yes, it's possible. Lots of things can happen without me knowing it. Could someone have interfered with my luggage without me knowing it? Well, yes. But if I answer yes, that probably means I'm going to get my luggage searched and all my especially purchased underwear taken out of the packaging, just so they can ascertain that there's nothing in there, no contraband I was trying to take away. Anyway, but you get my point. It's a question that doesn't make sense. So why don't they say, is there a possibility that someone could have interfered with your luggage since you packed it? That's the question to ask. And then you could make some kind of risk assessment. Well, not really, because I took my suitcase from the bedroom, I took it down the stairs, opened the door, taxi was there. Now the taxi driver took my suitcase and put it into the boot. Now, there could have been someone hiding in the boot. There could have been some very slim person tucked in at the back of the boot, ready with a bunch of keys that are known to be able to open any suitcase ever designed. And they could have opened the suitcase, searched through my underwear, my socks, my sunglasses, my t-shirts, my shorts, whatever I've got in there, and then carefully put the lid back on it and locked the suitcase and disappeared back into the shadows of the boot. And when we arrive at the airport, the taxi driver takes my suitcase out, hands it back to me. Now, what could happen next is I could potentially have gone into a trance. I could have been drugged or suddenly stepped into an alternative universe where for minutes, hours, possibly years, some unknown entity has the capability of opening my suitcase, rifling through my underwear, closing it again, placing it back in my hand, snapping their fingers or waving their wand or whatever they do, and I'm suddenly back in the queue at the airport. That all could happen. Yes, there is a risk that that could happen, but it's very unlikely. Extremely unlikely. Now, on the other hand, if the taxi driver's waiting at traffic lights and I'm there as a passenger and my suitcase is in the back, and someone smashes the windscreen, steals the taxi driver's keys, opens the boot, removes my suitcase, runs away with it, I can see them in a distance opening the suitcase, presumably looking for some money or traveller's checks or something, credit cards, and all they find is my underwear, and they run off. Then if you ask me the question, could someone have interfered with your luggage? Well, actually they did, on the way here. Oh, well, we'll need to sort that out then. But could they have done it without my knowledge? Not unless they're hiding in the shadows in the back of a taxi cab. So, the next time I'm asked whether someone could have interfered with my luggage, I think I'm going to say, well, that's a very interesting question. You see, because if it was over there and I was here, then there's potentially a circumstance in which I can envisage when the said suitcase could be interfered with without my knowledge, but only in the circumstances where my senses, of which I have a few, would not recognise the rifling through my personal possessions within said suitcase. here or there. Or it could be the other way around. I could be there and it could be here. But if the suitcase was between here and there, then it's no longer there nor here, it's somewhere else. And if it's somewhere else, then my knowledge is not extensive enough to know what's happening somewhere else. But it's not somewhere else. I'm here, you're there, we're all together, a suitcase is here. So in answer to your question, so I hope you enjoyed that wee piece there about the quirkiness of language. I find it really entertaining. It's one of my favourite things is playing around with words or playing around with worms, if you get my meaning. Anyway, it's now time for
Drumming Joke of the Week.
This week's drummer's joke takes place in the far north of Scotland, in Sutherland, the county of Sutherland. It gets the name Sutherland because it was the Southlands. I was always a bit confused about why the most northerly part of mainland United Kingdom would be called the Southlands, Sutherland. And it was only when I first started to explore the islands of Orkney and Shetland that I began to realise that Orkney and Shetland were pivotal in the old ancient Viking civilization. And for them, the Southlands were the mainland. So the north of Scotland, from the perspective of an old Viking, was the Southlands. So that's why it's called Sutherland. Up in Sutherland there is a drum facilitator called Magnus. Magnus has been drum facilitating for years. So what is drum facilitating? Well, if you have a drum circle, which is several people, up to 40, 50, could be hundreds in some cases, all sitting round in a circle, ideally, or circles. They could be concentric circles, a number of rows. Then your facilitator stands in the middle and he or she will guide everyone. He's a bit like, or she's a bit like a conductor. So they will give you signals: slow down, speed up, play this rhythm, play that rhythm. And in that way, the drum circle turns into a rhythmic orchestra. It's fantastic. So Magnus has become a drum circle facilitator, but he's a bit frustrated. He's seen examples of other drum circle facilitators and how they dance around the circle, how they motivate people, how they gesticulate with grace, and how confident they are at leading the drum circle. And Magnus hasn't quite reached that stage yet, partly because he doesn't really feel his arms and legs always do what he tells them to do. I'm sure we've all had that experience when trying to dance. I have, anyway. So Magnus reads up on this, and he remembers a scene in Highlander when Sean Connery teaches the Highlander to run like a stag. Sean Connery teaches the Highlander to think like a stag, to feel the breath coming out his nose, to feel his hoof scratching at the ground, and then the Highlander takes on the persona of the stag and runs and runs across the Highlands with great speed. So Magnus is thinking, I wonder if there's something like that that would help me with my drum facilitation. So he thinks about it. What is it that I'm looking for? Well, I need to be able to use my arms flexibly, to be able to give signals, and to be able to gesticulate with grace and with ease and with a flowing movement that encourages people to play their drums. And the other thing he needs to do is to be able to run around the room. He needs to be able to jump from one place to another. He needs to be able to run round a circle. He needs to be able to get from one side of the circle to the other as quickly as possible. He needs that agility. That's a good word. Agility. Confidence, agility, and flexibility. That's what he needs. So he's thinking, what else apart from the physical aspects do I need? And the key thing, one of the key things about being a drum circle facilitator is being able to sense what people are playing, to be able to sense where a rhythm is going, to be able to sense what people are capable of, and to try and raise them to that level. It's like having antennae. It's like having a satellite system built into your head. You're constantly monitoring what's going on in the circle and guiding it so that it can be the best that it can be. So Magnus decides, okay, I need flexible limbs. I need to be able to sort of fly around the room. I need to be able to monitor and very quickly make decisions based on my internal satellite system, my antennae. So Magnus decides he's going to consult a hypnotherapist. What better way to try and take on the characteristics that he's looking for than to have hypnotherapy, so that in his subconscious he becomes able to think like whatever creature he needs to be in order to have these characteristics. So he gets a bus into Inverness. Inverness is the big city up there in the north of Scotland. And he goes to see a hypnotherapist. And the hypnotherapist listens carefully about what he has to say, about what he is looking for. This is a very unusual request. There's not many people come to the therapist asking them to try and place them mentally inside the mind of another creature in order to take on physical and psychological characteristics. So he thinks long and hard about this, and he says to Magnus, flexible arms, flexible legs, the ability to almost fly around a room and to be able to get from one side of a circle to another, to have internal antennae that are able to monitor what could be hundreds of people simultaneously and to guide them towards success as a drum circle. I have the very creature in mind. Magnus is very excited. He can't wait to find out what persona he's going to take on. So, what is it? What am I going to be? Is it a gazelle? Or a tiger? A cheetah? They're very fast, a cheetah. Or some kind of bird? A hawk? Very fast, very fast. Well, no, I wasn't thinking along those lines, says the psychotherapist. Thinking about the characteristics that you've asked me for, I have come to a conclusion that there's only one creature that embodies everything that you're asking for. You need to become a moth. A moth. A moth? A moth, says Magnus. I never thought of being a moth. But I suppose when I think about it, they are good at flying around and they get into very cramped spaces. They're very nimble. They have antennae. They're always able to sense what's going on. Yeah, okay. I get that. I understand. Okay, so let's begin. So, the hypnotherapist asks Magnus to lie down on the couch. He asks him to relax, and he very slowly starts to talk at the same rate as Magnus's heartbeat, and in that way he begins to encourage Magnus to relax. Now, for the purposes of this joke, I'm not going to go through the whole of the hypnotherapy exercise because some of you might fall asleep and wake up feeling that you're a moth. But let's just say it's standard techniques that you go through until you get to the very depths of the subconscious, and then you can start suggesting things. So let's just fast forward half an hour, and the hypnotherapist is saying to Magnus, so now you have the characteristics of a moth. You're fleet of flight. You have wings to carry you. You have antennae to detect all around you. And when I count to 3, you will wake up. 1, 2, 3. Magnus's eyes spring open. He feels refreshed. He feels energetic. He feels effervescent. And the hypnotist says, how do you feel? And Magnus says, well, when are we going to start? And the hypnotherapist says, excuse me, Magnus, you've actually been out on the couch for 35 minutes. Really? I had no idea. Well, that's because you were in a deep, deep trance. And now you will have the subconscious characteristics of a moth. But I don't feel any different, says Magnus. I still feel the same. Well, you'll find over the next 24 hours that you will start to be able to move around the world in a way you could never do before. Magnus is delighted. He thanks the hypnotherapist and he leaves Inverness on the bus to go back up home. He doesn't feel any different, but he's certainly aware of things he wasn't really aware of before. There's a woman sitting in front of him on the bus who has a rather nice smelling overcoat. I wonder what that tastes like, Magnus said to himself, not realising that that's probably not something that would have occurred to him the day before. So he's going up on the bus, he's looking out the window, and he senses that there's going to be something coming round the corner very quickly, and that the bus is going to have to swerve. He shouts out, "Watch out!" And the bus driver brakes without even seeing anything coming round the corner, but just instinctively responds to Magnus's shout. Just as well he did, because an oil tanker was coming round the corner and it would inevitably have crashed with the bus. Magnus began to realise his finely tuned senses were beginning to kick in. By the time he got home, Magnus was feeling at one with the world. He was able to almost dance up the street to his house. The next day, Magnus woke up and he had a very itchy nose. His eyebrows had grown about 6 inches and he had what felt like hairy arms. But when he looked, they were more like feathers. He was beginning to develop physical characteristics of being a moth. And he began to panic. He stood up and immediately found that he felt like he weighed half the weight he did the day before. There is no doubt about it. He was more nimble, more flexible. He was able to dance around the room. And that was fine, but he didn't like the idea that he was going to be turning into a moth. That was not the idea. He begins to panic. He panics. This can't happen. I can't cope with this. He phones the hypnotherapist. The hypnotherapist says, well, I can quite easily, go back into your subconscious and we can remove the suggestion that you're a moth. But you would need to come to Inverness for that, and I'm not back here for another 2 weeks. Can you tolerate being a moth for 2 weeks? No, I can't do that. And already he was finding it more difficult to speak. His mouth was becoming more pointed. His nose was beginning to sink into his face. It was incredible to watch. And his pet cat, called Kafka, was getting very curious. Kafka was wondering, it is beginning to smell like something I could have a piece of. So the whole situation was becoming quite stressful. Not only turning into a moth, but your pet cat hoping for the point where it can devour you. Oh no, this couldn't go on. So he panicked. He dialed 111, Emergency Health Services, and he spoke to someone who was very understanding, a lovely nurse who took some notes. A moth, you say? Yes, said Magnus. Like butterfly type moth? Yes, says Magnus. So you believe you're turning into a moth? I think so, says Magnus. Okay, I think what's probably best, given that you were hypnotised, is to go and find a psychiatrist. Oh, a psychiatrist? I think there's maybe one of those in the local town. Well, that's what I do. You just go along there, tell them that you've spoken to us here on the NHS line and that you have to see them. Right, I'll do that. He puts the phone down and he rushes out of the door, jumps on the bus and gets the bus into the local town. And he almost flies off the bus, and already he can sense that some of the shops and practices are beginning to close. Some of the services are going to be shutting soon. So he's in a bit of a rush. And then, suddenly, he sees it. That's the psychiatrist's office over there. And he rushes over. And just as he's about to ring the doorbell, the door opened, and there is a man wearing a white coat. "I'm sorry, sir," says the man. "I'm just closing." "Oh, but no, you need to see me. You need to see me." "Oh, I'm sorry. You'll need to make an appointment and maybe come back tomorrow." No, I can't wait. I don't think I can survive. I don't know whether I'll be around tomorrow. This is terrible. I don't know what's happening." "Oh, well, come inside and let's have a look." So he goes in to the office, and the man with the white coat invites him to sit down, and he sits down opposite him at the other side of the desk. So he sits down, and the man with the white coat says, "Now, I really was closing, so I don't have much time for you, but let's just see if we can help you out. So what seems to be the trouble?" And Magnus proceeds to explain how the day before he was in Inverness and saw a hypnotherapist who hypnotised him and suggested that he then start to acquire the characteristics of a moth. That he came back home and already found that he was growing feathers on his arms, his eyebrows were getting longer like antennae, and that he already had a sense of smell and taste of a moth. He wanted to eat an old woman's coat sitting on the bus. Well, the man in the white coat was astounded. "What? You expect me to believe all this? Sounds like nonsense to me." "No, it's all true. It's true, honestly." And Magnus remembered that he had the hypnotherapist's business card in his wallet, and he took it out and showed it to the man. "Oh, well, the thing is, laddie," says the man in the white coat, "I think you need to see a psychiatrist, and I'm a dentist. You've rung the bell of a dental surgery." "Oh, I didn't realise," says Magnus. That's a mistake." And the man in the white coat, the dentist, says, "What brought you to my door?" "Well," says Magnus, "your light was on."
Drumming joke of the week.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that wee story about Magnus the Moth. That was probably one of the best drumming jokes of the week. What do you think? Send me an email, hugcast@huggadrum.com. Now it's time for the anagram, or the drumagram. Now, last week's drumagram was one of my favourite anagrams. It was supersonic. Supersonic. So supersonic, when it's turned into something connected with drums, percussion, drumming, is percussion. I said it, percussion. So supersonic is percussion. So well done if you got that. So this week's anagram is main tip. Main tip. M-A-I-N-T-I-P. What is that an anagram of? And remember, the word relates to percussion and drumming. So good luck. Well, that's the end of the podcast for this week. I'm really glad you stuck in till the very end. Thank you so much. Please remember, next week is Mental Health Week in the UK. Look out for each other. Look out for yourself. And until next week, bye.